Lisa Johnson, an 8-year-old with bright eyes and a hopeful smile, stepped onto the yellow school bus for the first time in her new neighborhood. Her mother, Nina, waved goodbye, her heart filled with dreams of a better future for her family. But as the bus doors closed, neither of them could have imagined the sinister journey that lay ahead. Mr. Miller, the gray-haired bus driver with a grandfatherly demeanor, harbored something sinister behind his friendly facade. His welcoming smile concealed a dark truth that would soon cast a shadow over young Lisa's life in ways her parents could never have anticipated. As days turned into weeks, Nina's maternal instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong in their predominantly white neighborhood. Her growing fears about Mr. Miller, a long-standing bus driver respected by the community, seemed impossible to voice without risking disbelief or worse. What unspeakable acts were happening on that school bus, and how could one mother's determination to protect her child become the catalyst for exposing a community's shocking secrets? Before we dive into this gripping tale of courage and justice, comment below where you're watching from today, and if you enjoyed this shocking story, don't forget to subscribe. The warm summer breeze rustled through the leaves of the giant oak tree in front of the modest 2-story house. A moving truck rumbled away down the quiet suburban street, leaving behind a family of 3 standing on their new front lawn. Lisa, an energetic 8-year-old girl with dark curly hair and bright eyes, bounced on her toes, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Her mother, Nina, placed a gentle hand on Lisa's shoulder. "Well, what do you think, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's different," Lisa said, tilting her head. "But I like the tree. Can we put a swing on it?" "Nah," Nina laughed, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "We'll see, maybe once we're all settled in." Malcolm, Lisa's father, joined them, wiping sweat from his brow. "That's the last of the boxes," he announced. "What do you say we order some pizza and call it a day?" As they walked into their new home, the family couldn't help but notice the curious glances from their neighbors. They were, after all, the only black family on the street, perhaps in the entire neighborhood. Later that evening, as they sat around a box serving as a makeshift table, Malcolm raised his slice of pizza in a toast to new beginnings. "I can't wait to set up my home office," Nina said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "No more commuting for me. I'll be able to work on my designs right here." Malcolm nodded, a proud smile on his face. "And I'm sure you'll knock their socks off at the new firm," he said, referring to his own job in the city. "It's a bit of a drive, but the opportunity is worth it." Lisa piped up, her mouth full of cheese and pepperoni. "What about my new school? Do you think I'll make friends?" Nina and Malcolm exchanged a glance, their smiles faltering slightly. "Of course you will, sweetie," Nina assured her. "You're smart, kind, and funny. The other kids will love you." Malcolm added, "Just be yourself, Lisa. That's all you need to do." As the evening wore on, the family continued to chat, their voices filling the empty house with warmth and life. They spoke of their dreams for the future, the adventures they might have, and the memories they would create in this new place. But beneath the excitement, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. They were venturing into unknown territory, a predominantly white neighborhood that might not be as welcoming as they had hoped. Nina and Malcolm had discussed this at length before making the move, weighing the opportunities against the potential challenges. "We're doing this for Lisa," Malcolm had said during one of their late-night conversations. "Better schools, safer streets, she deserves every chance we can give her." Nina had agreed, but now, as she looked around their new living room scattered with boxes and unfamiliar shadows, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. Would they truly be accepted here? Would Lisa be able to thrive? As if sensing her mother's unease, Lisa snuggled up next to her. "I'm glad we're here together," she said simply, her small hand finding Nina's. Nina squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling a surge of love and protectiveness. "Me too, baby," she whispered. "Me too." The family spent the rest of the evening unpacking essentials and preparing for the next day, Malcolm's first day at his new job and, more importantly, Lisa's first day at her new school. As Nina tucked Lisa into bed that night, and a room still cluttered with boxes, she paused to smooth her daughter's hair. "Are you excited about tomorrow?" she asked. Lisa nodded, her eyes wide and a little nervous. "Too," she admitted. "That's okay," Nina reassured her. "It's normal to feel nervous about new things, but remember, you're brave and strong. You've got this." Lisa smiled, her fears seeming to melt away under her mother's loving gaze. "Thanks, Mom. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." As Nina closed Lisa's door, she leaned against the wall for a moment, taking a deep breath. She hoped with all her heart that tomorrow would be the start of something wonderful for all of them, especially for Lisa. In their own bedroom, Nina found Malcolm already in bed, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through his phone, checking the route to work again. She climbed in beside him. He nodded, putting the phone aside. "Want to make sure I don't get lost on my first day." He chuckled, then more seriously asked, "How's Lisa?" "Nervous but excited," Nina replied. Malcolm wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "And how are you?" Nina sighed, nestling into his embrace. "The same, I guess. Nervous but excited." She paused, then added softly, "I hope we made the right decision." "We did," Malcolm said firmly. "It might not be easy at first, but we're together. We can handle anything as long as we have each other." As they drifted off to sleep, the house settled around them, creaking and sighing as if adjusting to its new occupants. Outside, the stars twinkled over their new neighborhood, holding the promise of a fresh start and the potential for both challenges and triumphs in the days to come. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Nina and Malcolm stood with Lisa, waiting for the school bus. Lisa clutched her new backpack tightly, her eyes darting up and down the street. "You've got your lunch, right?" Nina asked, smoothing Lisa's hair for the 10th time. Lisa nodded, patting her backpack. "And my notebook and pencils." "And you're all set, champ." Malcolm interrupted gently, kneeling down to Lisa's level. "Remember what we talked about." Lisa's face grew serious as she recited, "Be myself, be kind, and if anything makes me uncomfortable, tell a teacher or you guys right away." Malcolm smiled, giving her a quick hug. "That's my girl." The distant rumble of an engine caught their attention as the yellow school bus rounded the corner. Nina felt her heart rate quicken. This was it, the moment we'd been both anticipating and dreading. The bus pulled up, its doors creaking open. The driver, a middle-aged white man with graying hair, looked down at them for a moment. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by a neutral expression. "Good morning," he said, his tone polite but not particularly warm. "You must be new to the route." Nina nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, we just moved in. This is Lisa. She'll be riding with you." The driver nodded curtly. "Welcome aboard. I'm Mr. Miller." Lisa hesitated for a moment, looking back at her parents. Nina gave her an encouraging nod, and Malcolm whispered, "You've got this, sweetheart." Taking a deep breath, Lisa climbed the steps as she disappeared into the bus. Nina and Malcolm caught a glimpse of the other children inside. Most seemed curious, a few smiled, but one or two wore expressions that made Nina's stomach clench as the bus pulled away. Nina and Malcolm stood hand in hand, watching until it disappeared around the corner. "She'll be fine," Malcolm said, giving Nina's hand a reassuring squeeze, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice that matched the worry in Nina's heart. The day seemed to crawl by for Nina. She tried to focus on setting up her home office, but her thoughts kept drifting to Lisa. Was she making friends? Were the teachers kind? Was she feeling out of place? When the time came for Lisa to return, Nina found herself pacing by the window, watching the street. The familiar rumble of the bus engine sent her hurrying to the door. Lisa bounded down the bus steps, her backpack bouncing. "Hi, Mom," Lisa called, waving as she ran up the driveway. "Hi, sweetie. How was your first day?" Nina asked, enveloping Lisa in a hug. Lisa's excitement was palpable as she recounted her day, her nice teacher, the girl she sat next to at lunch, the cool playground equipment. Nina listened, relief washing over her. It seemed like things had gone well. That evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Lisa continued to share stories from her day. Malcolm, home from his first day at the new job, listened intently, asking questions and laughing at Lisa's animated descriptions. As the conversation lulled, Lisa suddenly said, "Our bus driver is rude." Nina and Malcolm exchanged surprised glances. "What do you mean, honey?" Nina asked carefully. Lisa shrugged, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "He just says mean things sometimes," she mumbled, then quickly changed the subject, asking Malcolm about his new office. Nina caught Malcolm's eye over Lisa's head, seeing her own concern reflected there, but they didn't push it, not wanting to dampen Lisa's otherwise positive first day. Later that night, as Nina and Malcolm got ready for bed, Malcolm brought it up. "What do you think Lisa meant about the bus driver?" he asked. Nina sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I don't know. It could be nothing, maybe he's just gruff. But it could be something." Malcolm finished for her. "Should we ask her more about it?" Nina shook her head. "Not yet. Let's give it a few days and see if she mentions anything else. We don't want to make her anxious if it's nothing." Malcolm nodded, but Nina could see the worry lines creasing his forehead. She felt it too, the nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. But for now, all they could do was wait and watch. As they settled into bed, Nina found herself staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying Lisa's words. "He just says mean things sometimes. What kind of mean things, and why?" Questions swirled in her mind, keeping sleep at bay long into the night. The weeks that followed seemed to settle into a rhythm. Malcolm left early each morning for his long commute to the city, while Nina worked from her newly set-up home office. Lisa continued to ride the bus to and from school, and life in their new home began to feel more normal. But beneath the surface of this new routine, Nina couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. She noticed subtle changes in Lisa's behavior. The bubbly, talkative girl who had excitedly recounted every detail of her first few days at school now gave only brief, noncommittal answers when asked about her day. One afternoon, as Nina took a break from her work, she found Lisa sitting by the living room window, staring outside with a distant look in her eyes. "Is everything okay?" Nina called softly. Lisa startled slightly, as if pulled from deep thoughts. "Yeah, Mom. I'm fine," she said, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Nina sat down next to her daughter, gently stroking her hair. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? If something's bothering you at school or with friends." She trailed off, hoping Lisa would fill in the blank, but Lisa just nodded, leaning into her mother's touch without saying a word. That evening, while Malcolm worked late, Nina decided to broach the subject again. She sat next to Lisa on the couch, casually asking about her day. When Lisa gave her usual short answers, Nina gently brought up the bus driver comment from weeks ago. "Remember when you mentioned that the bus driver sometimes says mean things?" Nina asked, keeping her tone light. "Has anything like that happened again?" Lisa tensed visibly, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "It's nothing, Mommy," she insisted, but her voice quivered slightly. Nina noticed Lisa's eyes darting around almost as if she was afraid someone might overhear. The sight made Nina's heart ache. What was her daughter so afraid of? "Lisa, sweetheart," Nina said softly, cupping Lisa's face gently. "You know you can tell me anything, right? If someone is being mean to you or if you're scared about something, I want to know. I'm here to help you. For a moment, it seemed like Lisa might open up. Her lower lip trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes, but then, as quickly as the vulnerability had appeared, it vanished. Lisa pulled away, forcing a smile. I'm fine, Mom. Really? Can I go play in my room now? Nina nodded, her heart heavy as she watched Lisa hurry away. Something was definitely wrong, but she felt helpless to figure out what it was. When Malcolm finally got home that night, Nina shared her observations as they prepared dinner together. She told him about Lisa's strange behavior, her gut feeling that something was wrong, and her failed attempt to get Lisa to open up. Malcolm listened as he stirred the pot, his brow furrowed in concentration. When Nina finished, he sighed heavily. Nina, I think you might be overreacting, he said, his voice tired. Lisa is just adjusting. It's a big change for all of us. Nina felt a flare of frustration. But Malcolm, you haven't seen how she's been acting. I really think. Malcolm cut her off, his voice rising slightly. I have enough problems at work, Nina. I don't need you bringing this up again. Just let it go. Lisa's fine. Don't make this into something. It's not. The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling of the pot. Nina turned away, hurt and angry, feeling unsupported and invalidated. Malcolm immediately regretted his outburst, but didn't know how to take back his words. They finished preparing dinner in intense silence. When Lisa joined them at the table, the atmosphere was strained. Lisa looked from one parent to the other, sensing the unspoken tension. Is everything okay? She asked hesitantly. Everything's fine, sweetheart, Malcolm said quickly, forcing a smile. How was your day? As Lisa launched into a carefully edited version of her day, Nina pushed her food around her plate, her appetite gone. She caught Malcolm's apologetic glance, but couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. That night, as they lay in bed with their backs turned to each other, Nina couldn't sleep. She replayed Lisa's words and actions in her mind, her maternal instinct screaming that something was very wrong. But Malcolm's dismissal of her concerns left her feeling isolated and unsure. Maybe I'm overreacting, she thought. What if Lisa is just going through a normal adjustment period? But why do I have this persistent feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach? Nina tossed and turned, her mind racing. She thought about the bus driver, Lisa's changing behavior, and the way their daughter seemed to withdraw more each day. There had to be a connection, but what was it? As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Nina made a decision. If no one else would take her concerns seriously, she would have to find out the truth herself. Tomorrow, she would take matters into her own hands. Little did Nina know that the truth she sought would come crashing down on their family sooner and more dramatically than she could have ever anticipated. The events set in motion by her simple question to Sarah would snowball into a crisis that would test their family's strength, challenge their beliefs, and forever change their lives in this new community. The following afternoon, Nina found herself at the local park, absently watching Lisa play on the swings. Her mind was still whirling with questions and concerns from the previous day's observations. As she sat there lost in thought, a voice startled her back to reality. Beautiful day, isn't it? Nina looked up to see one of her neighbors, a middle-aged white woman she recognized from down the street. The woman smiled warmly, gesturing to the empty space on the bench beside her. Nina, mind if I join you? She asked. Nina nodded, forcing a smile. Of course not. Please, sit down. As the woman settled beside her, Nina's mind raced. Here was an opportunity, a chance to get another perspective to see if her concerns were justified or if she was indeed overreacting. My name's Sarah, by the way, the woman said, extending her hand. I'm Nina Johnson, she replied, shaking Sarah's hand. Nice to meet you. Properly, they chatted amiably for a few minutes about the neighborhood, the weather, and the challenges of moving to a new place. Nina found herself relaxing slightly, grateful for the friendly conversation. Finally gathering her courage, she decided to broach the subject that had been consuming her thoughts. "Sarah," she began hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "It's about the school bus driver, Mr. Miller." Sarah's eyebrows raised slightly, but she nodded encouragingly. "Of course. What about him?" Nina took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Lisa, my daughter, mentioned the bus driver being rude. I've been a little concerned about how he treats the kids. I was wondering if you've heard anything similar from other parents or your own children." Sarah's demeanor changed immediately and shockingly. Her friendly smile vanished, replaced by a hard, angry expression that made Nina recoil slightly. "How dare you?" Sarah hissed, her voice low but filled with venom. "How dare you accuse Mr. Miller of anything? He's been driving the kids in this neighborhood for decades. He's a good man." Nina was stunned into silence, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly as Sarah continued her tirade. "You just came into this neighborhood, and you're already causing trouble. Thinking you're the boss around here," Sarah spat, her face flushed with anger. "If you don't like it, you're free to leave. I think you'd be doing everyone here a favor anyway." The words hit Nina like a physical blow. The thinly veiled racism in Sarah's outburst left her feeling sick to her stomach. She had suspected that not everyone in the neighborhood would be welcoming, but the raw hostility in Sarah's voice was beyond anything she had imagined. "I'm so sorry," Nina managed to stammer, rising from the bench on shaky legs. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. I was just concerned about my daughter." Sarah stood as well, her eyes cold. "Well, maybe you should teach your daughter to show some respect instead of making up stories about good people." With that, Sarah turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving Nina standing alone, feeling as if the ground had been pulled out from under her feet. Across the playground, Lisa had stopped swinging and was watching the scene with wide, worried eyes. Nina forced herself to smile reassuringly at her daughter, even as her mind reeled from the encounter. As they walked home hand in hand, Nina's thoughts were in turmoil. Sarah's reaction had been so extreme, so disproportionate to a simple question. Was this how the entire neighborhood felt about them? Were they seen as troublemakers simply for existing here? More importantly, what did this mean for Lisa's situation? If this was how an adult reacted to a mere question about Mr. Miller, how would they respond if Lisa ever came forward with a real complaint? That night, after Lisa had gone to bed, Nina sat alone in the living room, turning the day's events over in her mind. She hadn't told Malcolm about her conversation with Sarah. She couldn't bear to see the "I told you so" look in his eyes if he dismissed her concerns again. But now, more than ever, Nina was convinced that something was deeply wrong. The pieces still didn't fit together, but Sarah's overreaction had only strengthened Nina's resolve to get to the bottom of what was happening. As she finally headed to bed, exhaustion weighing heavily on her, Nina made a decision. She would continue to investigate on her own. She would watch, listen, and gather evidence. When she had enough to prove that her concerns were valid, she would confront Malcolm, the school, and anyone else who stood in the way of protecting her daughter. Little did Nina know that the truth she sought would come crashing down on their family sooner and more dramatically than she could have ever anticipated. The events set in motion by her simple question to Sarah would snowball into a crisis that would test their family's strength, challenge their beliefs, and forever change their lives in this new community. The weeks that followed Nina's unsettling encounter with Sarah were filled with a tense, uneasy quiet. Nina and Malcolm were hypervigilant, watching Lisa for any signs of distress, but she seemed to be doing better. The cloud that had hung over her in recent weeks appeared to be lifting, and she was talking more about school and her new friends. Nina found herself wondering if perhaps her fears had been unfounded after all. Maybe Lisa had just been going through an adjustment period and things were finally settling down. The thought brought both relief and a twinge of guilt. Had she really been on the verge of upending their lives over nothing? On a crisp autumn afternoon, Nina sat at her desk, deeply engrossed in a design project for a new client. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft tapping of her keyboard and the occasional rustle of leaves outside the window. Glancing at the clock on her computer screen, Nina realized it was almost time for Lisa to return from school. She saved her work and headed to the kitchen to prepare an after-school snack, as was their usual routine. As she sliced apples and spread peanut butter on crackers, Nina found herself humming softly for the first time in weeks. She felt a sense of normalcy as things finally fell into place in their new home. 4 p.m. came and went. Nina wasn't worried yet. Sometimes the bus ran a few minutes late. She arranged the snack on a plate and set it on the kitchen counter, then returned to her office to answer a quick email. But as 4:15 approached with no sign of Lisa, a knot of anxiety began to form in Nina's stomach. She went to the front window, peering out at the quiet street. No yellow bus in sight. By 4:30, Nina was pacing the living room, phone in hand. She called Malcolm, trying to keep the panic out of her voice as she explained that Lisa hadn't come home. "I'm sure it's nothing," Malcolm said, trying to convince himself as much as Nina. "Maybe the bus broke down or something, but I'm getting worried." Malcolm's voice was tense but reassuring. "I'm leaving work now. I'll be home as soon as I can." "Have you called the school?" Nina shook her head, then remembered Malcolm couldn't see her. "Not yet. I wanted to check with you first." "I'll call them right now," Malcolm replied. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, Nina's worry turned to full-blown panic. She called the school, her voice shaking as she explained that Lisa hadn't come home. The receptionist informed her that all buses had returned to the depot and the school was closing for the day. "But my daughter isn't home," Nina insisted, her voice rising. "She has to be somewhere between the school and here. Can't you check? Can't you do something?" The receptionist's voice was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson, but all our staff have left for the day. If your daughter doesn't turn up soon, I suggest you call the police." Nina hung up, her hands trembling. "Call the police," she whispered. How had this happened? How had a normal day turned into this nightmare? Malcolm arrived home to find Nina in tears, frantically dialing the bus depot. Nina and Malcolm clung to each other, both imagining worst-case scenarios. The ticking of the clock on the mantel seemed to mock them with each passing second. "This is all my fault," Nina whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I knew something was wrong. I should have done more. I should have." Malcolm cut her off, pulling her close. "This is not your fault, Nina. We'll find her. She has to be somewhere." Just as Nina was about to grab her keys and drive around the neighborhood, they heard the creak of the front door. Time seemed to stand still as they turned to see Lisa walk in, 2 hours late. Her yellow skirt wrinkled, pink shirt askew, and her usually neat braids disheveled, Lisa looked pale, her eyes wide and filled with unshed tears. She was trembling slightly, and there was something in her expression, a mix of fear, shame, and something else Nina couldn't quite identify, that made her mother's heart clench. "Lisa, sweetheart," Nina said softly, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "What happened? Where were you?" Lisa looked up at her parents, her lower lip quivering. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said the words that would shatter their world. The bus driver did it again. The room fell silent, the weight of Lisa's words hanging heavy in the air. Nina and Malcolm exchanged a horrified glance. The full implications of what their daughter had said slowly sank in. In that moment, all of Nina's fears, all her suspicions and worries of the past weeks came crashing down on her. She had been right all along. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Guiding Lisa to the living room couch, they sat on either side of her, creating a protective cocoon. Malcolm gently took Lisa's hand while Nina stroked her back soothingly. "Sweetheart," Nina began, her voice soft but firm, "we need you to tell us everything." "What do you mean? The bus driver did it again? What has he been doing?" Lisa hesitated, her small frame shaking slightly. She looked from Nina to Malcolm, then down at her hands. After a moment of tense silence, she began to speak, her voice quavering. "Mr. Miller, he doesn't like me. He doesn't like our kind." Nina and Malcolm exchanged a pained look over Lisa's head, their worst fears confirmed. Malcolm squeezed Lisa's hand encouragingly, urging her to continue. "Continue, Lisa." Taking a deep breath, Lisa began to reveal the full extent of what she had been enduring since her first week at school. "Mr. Miller has been making passive-aggressive and racist remarks. He mutters things under his breath as I board the bus or makes pointed comments about certain people not belonging in the neighborhood. When I said he was rude before, I thought maybe I was imagining things." Nina felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had sensed something was wrong but hadn't pushed hard enough to protect her daughter. But then Lisa dropped the bombshell that sent chills down her parents' spines. "This wasn't the first time Mr. Miller had left me stranded," Lisa continued. "About a month ago, he dropped me off on a deserted road far from home. He told me if I ever told anyone, I would regret it. He said no one would believe me anyway because of the color of my skin." Nina pulled Lisa into a tight embrace, her own tears falling freely now. Malcolm stood up, pacing the room, his fists clenched in rage. "Today," Lisa continued, her words muffled against Nina's shoulder, "he did it again. He stopped the bus and told me to get out. I was so scared, Mommy. I didn't know where I was or how to get home." As Lisa's story unfolded, Nina and Malcolm were overwhelmed with a mix of emotions: horror at what their daughter had endured, guilt for not realizing sooner, and fierce protective anger towards Mr. Miller and a system that would allow this to happen. "I walked for a long time," Lisa said, her voice small and tired. "I was afraid to ask anyone for help because Mr. Miller said if I told anyone, he'd make sure we had to leave, that everyone would know we didn't belong here." Malcolm knelt in front of Lisa, taking her small hands in his. "Lisa, listen to me," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "What Mr. Miller did was wrong. Very, very wrong. And it's not your fault. Do you understand? None of this is your fault." Lisa nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she whispered. "Oh, baby," Nina said, hugging her daughter tighter. "You have nothing to be sorry for. We're so proud of you for being brave and telling us now." As Lisa's story came to an end, she seemed to deflate, exhausted and emotionally drained. Nina and Malcolm shared a determined look over their daughter's head. They knew what they had to do next. "We need to call the police," Malcolm said gently. "What Mr. Miller did is not just wrong, it's against the law. We need to make sure he can't do this to you or any other child ever again." Lisa's eyes widened in fear. "But what if they don't believe me? What if Mr. Miller was right and they think I'm lying?" Nina cued Lisa's face in her hands, looking directly into her eyes. "We believe you, sweetheart, and we will make them believe you too. We won't let anyone hurt you or scare you ever again. I promise." As Malcolm reached for the phone to call 911, Nina held Lisa close, her mind racing. She thought about Sarah's hostile reaction in the park and the neighbors who had watched them with suspicions since they moved in. Would the police take them seriously? Would they face more racism and disbelief? But looking at Lisa's tear-stained face, Nina knew they had no choice. They had to fight, not just for Lisa, but for every child who might face discrimination and abuse. They had to stand up and make their voices heard, no matter how hard it might be. As the sound of sirens grew closer, Nina steeled herself for the battle ahead. It would be difficult. She knew they would face skepticism, hostility, and probably more racism. But they would face it together as a family, and they would not rest until justice was served and Lisa and every child like her was safe. The shrill ring of the doorbell cut through the tense atmosphere in the Johnson household. Malcolm, his jaw set with determination, strode to the door and opened it to reveal two police officers, a tall middle-aged white man and a younger black woman. "Good evening, sir," the male officer said, his voice professional but not unkind. "I'm Officer Thompson, and this is my partner, Officer Brooks. We received a call about a missing child." Malcolm nodded, ushering them inside. "Yes, that was us, but our daughter is home now. However, we have a situation we need to report." As they entered the living room, Nina stood up, still holding Lisa close. The female officer, Brooks, immediately knelt down to Lisa's level. "Hi there," she said softly. "You must be Lisa. I'm glad to see you're safe. Is it okay if we ask you and your parents some questions about what happened today?" Lisa nodded hesitantly, clinging to Nina's hand. Over the next hour, the family recounted the day's events and the ongoing issues with Mr. Miller. Officer Thompson took notes, his expression unreadable, while Officer Brooks gently encouraged Lisa to share as much as she felt comfortable. As Lisa finished her story, a heavy silence fell over the room. Officer Thompson cleared his throat. "That's quite an accusation," he said carefully. "Mr. Miller has been a respected member of this community for decades." Nina felt a surge of anger. "Are you saying you don't believe our daughter?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Officer Brooks quickly intervened. "What my partner means is that we need to investigate thoroughly. This is a serious allegation, and we need to handle it carefully." Malcolm, who had been silent for most of the interview, spoke up. "We understand that, but our daughter has been traumatized. We need to know that you're taking this seriously." Officer Thompson nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "We'll need to speak with Mr. Miller, of course, and we'll need to corroborate Lisa's story. Are there any other children who might have witnessed anything?" Lisa shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Mr. Miller always made sure I was the last one on the bus," she whispered. "How long has this been going on? How had they not noticed?" Nina's heart clenched at her daughter's words. "How?" As the officers prepared to leave, Nina made a decision. "We want to go with you," she said firmly. "When you talk to Mr. Miller, we want to be there." Officer Thompson looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, that's not really protocol." "I don't care about protocol," Nina interrupted. "This is our daughter. We're talking about her safety. We need to see this through." After a moment of hesitation, Officer Brooks nodded. "All right, you can come with us, but you'll need to stay in the car while we speak with Mr. Miller." As they drove through the quiet suburban streets, Nina's mind raced. She knew where Mr. Miller lived, just 2 streets away. The proximity that had once seemed convenient now felt threatening. They pulled up in front of a modest 2-story house with a neatly manicured lawn. Nina felt a surge of anger at the normalcy of it all. How could someone who had caused her daughter so much pain live in such an ordinary place? As promised, Nina and Malcolm stayed in the car with Lisa while the officers approached the house. Through the window, they watched as Mr. Miller answered the door, his expression changing from confusion to defensiveness as the officers spoke. After what felt like an eternity, the officers returned to the car. Officer Thompson's face was grim. "Mr. Miller denies everything," he said. "He says he's never mistreated any child, let alone singled one out." Nina felt a wave of despair wash over her. Was this how it would end, with their daughter's pain dismissed, her trauma invalidated? But before she could voice her frustration, a commotion caught their attention. A woman was hurrying across the street, waving to get the officers' attention. "Wait," she called out. "I need to talk to you." As the woman approached, Nina recognized her with a start. It was another mother from the neighborhood, one of the few other black families in the area. "I couldn't help overhearing," the woman said, slightly out of breath. "I need to tell you, we've experienced something similar with our 2 kids. We didn't have the courage to speak up and just decided to drive the kids ourselves instead of letting them ride with the bus driver." Nina felt a surge of hope. Here finally was the corroboration they needed. She watched as the officers' expressions changed, Officer Thompson's skepticism giving way to concern, Officer Brooks' eyes narrowing with renewed determination. "Ma'am, we're going to need to take an official statement from you," Officer Brooks said. "This changes things significantly." As the woman nodded her agreement, Nina caught her eye. In that moment, a look of understanding passed between them, a shared experience of fear and the desire to protect their children in a world that didn't always see their worth. The next few hours passed in a blur as more officers arrived, and Mr. Miller was taken in for questioning. Other families in the neighborhood, emboldened by the unfolding events, came forward with their own stories. As dawn broke, Nina stood on her front porch, watching as Mr. Miller was led away in handcuffs. The sight brought a complex mix of emotions, relief and vindication, but also sadness at the reality of the world they lived in. Malcolm joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's over," he said softly. But Nina shook her head. "No," she replied, her voice filled with quiet determination. "It's just beginning. We have a lot of work to do to make sure this never happens again, not to Lisa, not to any child." As they turned to go back inside, where Lisa was finally sleeping peacefully, Nina knew their fight was far from over. But they had taken the first step. They had spoken up, stood their ground, and made their voices heard. In doing so, they had not only protected their daughter but had opened the door for change in their community. It wouldn't be easy, but Nina was ready for the challenge, for Lisa, for every child who had ever felt scared or unwelcome. They would continue to fight for justice and acceptance in the days that followed. After Mr. Miller's arrest, the Johnson family found themselves at the center of a community in turmoil. The story spread quickly, dividing opinions and stirring up long-buried tensions. Nina stood at her living room window, watching as a group of reporters camped out on their front lawn. The quiet suburban street she had once hoped would be a peaceful haven for her family had become a battleground of sorts. "Mom, are those people going to be there all day?" Lisa's voice came from behind her. Nina turned, forcing a smile for her daughter. "Don't worry about them, sweetheart. They'll go away soon." But even as she said it, Nina wasn't sure if she believed it herself. The media frenzy had been intense, with local and even some national outlets picking up the story. "Racist bus driver terrorizes black child," the headline screamed, reducing their painful experience to sensationalized sound bites. Malcolm entered the room, his face etched with worry. "I just got off the phone with the lawyer," he said quietly. "The prosecution is moving forward with the case. They want Lisa to testify." Nina's heart clenched at the thought of her daughter having to relive her trauma in front of a courtroom full of strangers. But she knew it might be necessary to ensure justice was served. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," she said, pulling Lisa close. "For now, let's focus on healing." Healing proved to be a complex process, not just for their family, but for the entire community. As more families came forward with their own stories of discrimination and mistreatment, it became clear that Mr. Miller's actions were symptomatic of a deep, systemic problem. The school board called an emergency meeting, which Nina and Malcolm attended along with dozens of other concerned parents. The atmosphere was tense, with accusations and counter-accusations flying. "We need to implement better screening processes for all school staff," one parent demanded. "This is just one isolated incident," another argued. "We can't overreact and change everything because of one bad apple." Nina listened to the back and forth, her frustration growing. Finally, she stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This isn't about one incident or one person," she said firmly. "This is about creating a community where all our children feel safe and valued. We need to look at the bigger picture, the biases and prejudices that allowed this to happen in the first place." Her words seemed to strike a chord. In the days that followed, a group of parents, both black and white, formed a diversity and inclusion committee. They began working on proposals for cultural sensitivity training, more diverse hiring practices, and a new system for reporting and addressing concerns. At home, Nina and Malcolm focused on helping Lisa heal. They found a therapist who specialized in working with children who had experienced racial trauma. Slowly but surely, they saw glimpses of their vibrant, confident daughter re-emerging. One afternoon, as Nina was helping Lisa with her homework, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Sarah, the neighbor who had lashed out at her in the park weeks ago. "I owe you an apology," Sarah said, her eyes downcast. "I was wrong to dismiss your concerns. I'm sorry for how I treated you." Nina was taken aback by the unexpected apology. For a moment, she was tempted to shut the door in Sarah's face, to reject the olive branch being extended. But then she thought of Lisa, of the world they were trying to create for her. "Thank you for saying that," Nina said finally. "It means a lot." It was a small step, but a significant one. As the weeks turned into months, Nina saw more such steps being taken throughout the community. The school implemented new policies, including cameras on all buses and an anonymous reporting system for students and parents. Mr. Miller's trial came and went, with the testimony of multiple families and the evidence gathered by the police. He was convicted and sentenced. On the day the verdict was announced, Nina held Lisa close, whispering, "You did it, baby. You were so brave, and you helped make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Lisa looked up at her mother, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did it, Mom. All of us together." As spring bloomed, bringing new life to the neighborhood, Nina felt a sense of cautious optimism. There was still work to be done, challenges to be faced, but they had chosen to stay and be part of the change they wanted to see. One sunny afternoon, Nina watched from her porch as Lisa boarded the school bus. The new driver, a kind-faced woman of color, greeted each child with a warm smile. Lisa turned and waved to her mother before taking her seat, chatting animatedly with a diverse group of friends. Nina waved back, her heart full. They had faced darkness and come out the other side. They had turned a painful experience into an opportunity for growth and change. Most importantly, they had shown Lisa and everyone else the power of standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult it might be. As the bus pulled away, Nina took a deep breath of the fresh spring air. There would be more challenges ahead. She knew the work of creating a truly inclusive community was ongoing, but for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel hope for Lisa, hope for their family, and hope for a future where every child could feel safe, valued, and at home. Thank you for joining us on this journey of courage and transformation. If you were moved by the Johnson family's story as much as we were, I've handpicked another tale that will touch your heart.